A first breath, a first step, a first word. Becoming strong, becoming whole, becoming one, becoming human. Human in the ambitious pursuits of the things in my heart, hoping that my eyes won't see them depart. Human in the emotional parts hidden, because sometimes it feels that laughing too loud is forbidden. Human in the identities deeply rooted within, wondering if the story of who I am is only to begin. But assured of the idea that my story is finite, knowing that even the sun's light won't always burn bright. Yet some things in the ordinary day feel eternal. The soft-spoken touch of a mum, the words scribbled in my journal. The smile of a stranger, the rainbow stretched over the sky that I see. Am I just hopeful, or am I fearful of the small things that define me? Thirsting to know, thirsting to be rational in the unexplainable. Am I seeking something sustainable or even attainable? A last breath, a last step, a last word. Human, 2023, who are we?
Good evening and welcome to our second evening event of Human. Whatever your week's been like or day, you are so welcome. My name is Chris. I'm a third year studying classics at St. John's.
I'm Sarah. I'm Sarah. I'm also a third year at John's studying theology. So this week, the Christian Union is hosting a series of events thinking about the topic of what it means to be human. So we'll be having various talks, interviews, and performances exploring who are we and what answers the historical person of Jesus gave in response to that question.
But just some practicalities to get out the way first. If you need the toilets are just through the door at the back of the church over there. Keep going and turn right and you'll find plenty there. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does sound, there's an exit there, and where you came in. And if at any point you need some time out, you can find a quiet space just behind the bookstall near the exit through the wooden doors. And if you have any other questions during the evening, just find someone wearing one of the nice green human jumpers, and they'll be happy to answer your questions.
So today we're looking at the theme of ambitious. And if you came to our lunchtime talk today or the evening talk yesterday, we really hope you enjoyed it. So we're going to continue with those questions, looking at limits and liberation. Tonight we'll be having a talk, a discussion, performances, and an interview with a Cambridge academic.
But first, to kick off, we'll be doing a game, something that I think is going to be quite ambitious.
But you're Cambridge students, you can do this. So if you've seen Richard Osman's House of Games, you might recognize this, but it's basically called Answer Smash. So, Cambridge Alumni Edition. This is the first example. The picture relates to something, and the comment also has an answer, and you have to smash those two answers together. So, for example, that logo. What's that logo, Chris, do you know?
I do believe it's Cambridge.
I think it is the Cambridge logo. And I'm sure you know this because I think it's your favorite film. The 2001 rom-com where Renee Zellweger can't choose between Hugh Grant and Colin Firth. What's that?
Oh, that must be Bridget Jones's Diary.
That's it. So the answer for that would be Bridget Jones's Diary, if this makes sense.
I'm sure you guys will get it.
You'll get the gist as we go along. Okay, so the next one. Who's in the picture and who is the Beatle whose real name is Richard Starkey?
Do discuss amongst yourselves. We'll give you about 10 seconds for each one.
So, in the picture, we have Alan Turing, and it's Ringo Starr. So, Alan Turingo Starr.
Nice. Next one, please. Ooh.
Maybe this is ambitious.
Oh, yeah. Any ideas? Any ideas? Well, the answer is Isaac Newtonic water.
I'm sure you guys got that. And the next one? So who's in that picture? And the Roman emperor who died in York in 337 AD. This is all Chris, because he's a classics student.
We didn't say it'd be easy. Okay, who was it again? Oh, yeah. Well, the answer is Francis Bacon Constantine. Next question, please.
So English students should know who is in the picture. And then a fungal skin infection known medically as tinea pedis.
What's the answer, Sarah?
So this is Sylvia Plathlete's foot. And I thought, I Googled athlete's foot and realized I don't think I can put a picture of that up here, so that's for your benefit.
You must recognize this guy. And the Shakespeare play where deciding the inheritance of three daughters turns tragic. Who knows that Shakespeare? The answer is Stephen Hawking Lear. Next question, please. Few more.
So famous Cambridge alumnus and Shakespearean poem beginning, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" If you know the number, that's impressive. So the answer for that is Emma Thompson at 18.
Nice.
This one might be a bit ambitious, the tube station
I feel
especially.
like I recognize the person. I don't know London very well.
Well done if you got this. It's Sacha Baron Cohen, Hendon Central.
That's so hard.
Yeah, I fudged that a bit.
Final question. Everyone knows that beard. And the answer is Charles Darwin Winchester.
So congrats if you got all those right. That was very impressive. So we're now going to be hearing from our speaker, Matt, for this evening. Matt, if you could join us on the stage. Well, the floor.
Hey, everyone. Good to see you.
Hi, Matt. Thanks so much for being with us this week. So who are you and what are you doing?
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Matt, as they've said. I work for a small church just on the edge of Cambridge, just out. I don't know if all of you know that Cambridge has a small airport, but I live basically just on the other side of the airport from here. I've been living there for about 18 months. I've been in Cambridge in total for about 5.5 years.
Oh, great. And we have one little question for you. Was there a time when you were too ambitious for your own good?
So I have got one thought, because they prompted they were going to ask, but then you asked me, what was it, Francis Bacon Constantine? And it's like, there it is, too ambitious for my own good, even trying to answer that. But I remember when I was about 15, most of you are looking at me right now and you think, what the thought in your head is not, yeah, rugby player. And that's because I'm not built like a rugby player. But when I was about 15, for some reason, I decided I would have a go at playing rugby with my school. I'm told, because I can't remember it, that someone kicked a ball towards me. I picked it up and decided to run at the biggest opposition player on the field. And as I say, I can't remember it because I didn't get up. And I only came to kind of proper consciousness 2 hours later. I'd stopped asking what time it was every 30 seconds. So yeah, I can't remember that at all, but that was definitely a moment where I was too ambitious for my own good, as proven by my unconsciousness.
Oh, thank you so much. Take it away.
Brilliant. I'm going to swap mics if I can, if that's all right, Chris. Thanks very much. So good to be with you all. Thank you for being here as we think about some of these really big questions about what it means for us to be human. And as you kind of give us the opportunity, the Christian Union and me the opportunity to think a little bit about whether or not the Bible has anything to say to that question that's relevant in 2023. I wonder, what would you say is your biggest daydream? Think about the moment when you're, I don't know, maybe you're on your bike around Cambridge. You've got that bit of blank time where you're not necessarily concentrating on something really hard. And where is it that your mind tends to go? Or maybe you're in the shower or something like that. What are the things that you start thinking about that kind of fill your mind and you start imagining, maybe you start imagining certain futures for yourself, something that would make life feel complete. We're thinking about ambition today, so maybe you could call it that, maybe an ambition, or maybe it's not quite as concrete as an ambition. It's just a kind of a hope, an idea, something that you long for really deep down. Maybe it's a relationship with that person who you're not entirely sure they know whether you exist yet or not, but you're hopeful that perhaps they've noticed you and you're hanging around them at the buttery and maybe they will soon. Or maybe it's something further in the future and you're thinking kind of it's that family that I hope to have one day, or that career that I hope to have one day, or that house that I hope to live in. Something that you feel, that will make my life complete. We all have them. We all have dreams like that. Some we keep very secret, kind of deeply buried, because they're almost too fragile to bring out into the open. It's almost as if we spoke them, they would just kind of fall apart. They're almost too precious. But then for others of us and for other dreams that we have, they're a lot more obvious. They're the things that drive us, that fire our ambition and fire what we do each day. They're the things that get us out of bed and perhaps the things that ground our sense of hope for something in the future. At university, those kind of ambitions are often revealed in the way people live day to day, the things they choose to spend their time on, the people they choose to spend their time with, the reason that they do their studies. A lot of those things you can kind of spot. You can think of your friends who are driven by the career that they might have. You can think of your friends who are driven by the prowess on the sports field that they might get at university. All sorts of different things. And the way that they spend their time reveals that. The way that you spend your time might reveal that about yourself. And as we say, this week, we are thinking about this big question of what it means to be human, what it means to be us. Yesterday, if you were with us, we were thinking a little bit about the drive for knowledge, what it is that drives us to want to know more. And I guess you could say that this evening we're thinking about the drive itself. Where does it come from? What is it about us that drives us forward? Someone once said that what makes us human is having the capacity to imagine a brighter tomorrow. But actually, it's even more than that, isn't it? Because it's not just imagining a brighter tomorrow. It's also being driven to bring that brighter tomorrow into reality, to actually make it happen. Whether that's for ourselves individually, or for our world, for others around us, for our families, our loved ones, or on the biggest scale. A drive to make a better tomorrow actually real. But there's a second question that's worth asking. When you start thinking about what's your biggest daydream and the biggest hopes and those drives for what that better tomorrow might look like, it's worth asking, how do you know that that is enough? How do you know that that daydream, that brighter tomorrow you imagine, will really deliver? Because that question brings us face to face with a universal human predicament. We can't do it all. We can't do everything that we might hope to do. So often we will find that our desires outstrip our capacities. We can't do everything we long for. We can't do everything we dream for. At some point, we might list all our ambitions and we realize that, like me, for example, playing cricket for England one day is something that I've just sadly had to let go of in the last couple of years. It comes about. We can't do everything. Either our abilities don't quite measure up or our capacities don't measure up. Maybe if I could spend all of my time, or could have spent all of my time, 100% of my time, trying to hone my cricket skills, I might have got a little higher than I did. But I couldn't do that because I had other things to do. That's what it means to be human in our worlds. And so there's this paradox that we face, which seems that the more we seek, well, we call it freedom to do what we want to do. The more we seek to do all the things we want to do, actually, the more we can find ourselves becoming kind of a little bit restricted because we are limited. We're thinking about limits and liberty tonight. And the fact that those two things sometimes clash against one another is simply part of being human in a world that has got so many different options that we could take, but we have limited ability to take them. So, for example, you might have just the biggest desire right now for you might be to know everything you possibly can about, I don't know, the 16th century. And so you read all the books, except you realize you can't possibly read all the books because you've also got to know something about the 17th century. So you've got to read some of the books. And then you can't read all of the books on those things either on your list because something else comes up. And so we find ourselves being frustrated. We can't quite get everything we want. Or you want to keep up good, healthy relationships, and you look at your friend count on Facebook or something, and you think, 1,500. How does that work? And these are all called friends? It's a complete lie. They're not friends at all, are they? Some of us, but some of them people don't even know, really. Met once and then they looked us up. Social media tells us that lie all the time. We can stay in contact with everyone. Whereas actually, in reality, having real relationships takes a lot of us. We're limited. We can't do that with everyone. And so all of our dreams can sometimes can feel like we can't quite grasp them. And yet the world keeps whispering to us, keeps on saying, chase after this, and you'll be satisfied. And then we find ourselves reaching a horizon and feeling like, I've finally arrived. And then what we find is that there is another horizon to push to. You think you've read all of the books in one part of the library, and you turn a corner, and there's a whole stack of shelves still to read. Ah, man, how am I ever going to reach that goal of being an expert in this? Easy. Make my field smaller. If I decide to become an expert in 1633 instead of the 16th century, then maybe I can accomplish it. Make it smaller. That's how we have to function. We have to reckon with our limits. And that's what prompted Oscar Wilde in his play Lady Windermere's Fan famously to write, in this world there are only two tragedies. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. Because when we've arrived, the question is, what next? I used to work as a doctor in the northeast of England. I spent 7 years working as a doctor, having studied medicine. And I can vividly remember that there were a few patients, every doctor will tell you this, there were a few patients which will never leave my memory. One in particular that I'm thinking of now, imprinted on my mind. He was in his 50s, in his late 50s, and he was probably the most successful businessman in the northeast of England. He was certainly among the top 2 or 3 richest men in the northeast of England at the time. And he had been driven by his dream to build a comfortable life for himself and his family. And he had driven himself hard at his business. He had built it up. He had earned all that he could possibly want. And the whole goal of his life was, I will spend my time with my children once we have reached that point. I'll retire early. I'll spend time with my family. And the reason I will never forget him is because I was looking after him in his mid to late 50s as a bitter man with terminal cancer. Because he had been chasing so hard after something, and he had found that in the process he had alienated his children. And then the dream had burst. At the same time, I was busy looking after patients in accident and emergency department who were literally killing themselves, chasing after all sorts of hopes and dreams and pleasures because they just never felt like they had enough. But this whole idea of chasing after our dreams and clashing up against our limits, it doesn't have to look kind of quite so destructive as either of those two stories. Just a little while ago, I came across the story of a lady called Sarah, written up, and this is how she's described. You'd have admired Sarah if you'd met her when I did. She was beautiful, brilliant, charming, the CEO of her company, the life of the party. She thrived on all that admiration. You could feel it in the razzle-dazzle energy that drew people to her like flame-bound moths. You'd never have suspected when you met her that Sarah was an addict, unless you'd seen her a few hours after she'd glowingly received an award or an ovation, when she was curled up in bed, anxious, needy, already jonesing for a fix. Sarah was abusing something more powerful, insidious, and accessible than any street drug, the adoration and esteem of others that some psychologists call narcissistic supply. Simply put, Sarah was addicted to praise. Her entire life revolved around eliciting positive attention from others, and she succeeded magnificently, but always insufficiently. Being praised launched her briefly into manic giddiness and then dropped her into troughs of depression that made King Lear look like Howdy Doody. You may have some experience with this particular addiction, and your background may have put you at risk. If your parents linked their acceptance to your achievements, if you were educated in a competitive system, if you ever participated in sports, theatre, a job, motherhood, in short, if you live in this world, then you've been set up to get hooked on praise. Now, you may be the unusual individual who's untouched by praise addiction. You may savor compliments without wanting them, enjoy performing well even if no one notices, love working whether or not you're succeeding. If so, you have my deepest respect, and it's great because you don't really care that you do. But if you ever walk in Sarah's fashionable, excruciating shoes, seeking approval obsessively, riding increasingly painful waves of hollow elation and overwhelming despair, it's time to sober up. Sometimes ambition can look very respectable, and it can eat us up. And the question is, how do we manage whatever it might be, whether it's praise or wealth or social status or pleasure or anything else? How do we manage in a world that never quite delivers what we think and hope it will? Diversify, maybe. Maybe we just look for other things and not single-mindedly pursue one thing. Maybe that's the answer. How can we avoid becoming trapped between both the objects and the goals of our desires? That's a big question when it comes to being human. And that's the question that we're going to think about a little bit tonight. One of the things we want to do this week is give opportunity for genuine discussion to happen. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pause, and a couple of questions are going to come up on the screen that are just prompts that perhaps you might want to discuss with the person next to you or with a couple of the people next to you. Where do you recognize that mismatch between human capacities and desires that I was talking about? And how would you advise someone who's experiencing life like Sarah did? Let's take 5 minutes, chat about that. If you don't want to chat about those questions, that's totally fine. It might be something else that I've already said has piqued something and you want to talk about that. It might be that you just want to talk about your day. Totally fine. Or it might be that you just want to listen to the conversation that's happening next to you. But let's have 5 minutes just to chat about those things. Well, let me break into your conversations there. brilliant to hear all sorts of discussion. These are big questions that we're grappling with, aren't they? One of the other things that we're really keen to do this week is to give opportunity to hear people's stories, particularly where they overlap with some of the questions, some of the ways that they've experienced these different parts of life. And so I'm really pleased to introduce Cecilia Brassett, who is part of the medical faculty in the university, teaches medical students anatomy, which I know is a really important job because I was once a medical student learning anatomy, so you have my utmost respect, and I'm going to hand over to Cecilia.
Thank you. Yep. So hello, my name is Cecilia, and I teach anatomy to medics. I was born in Hong Kong and came to study medicine at Downing in 1981. Yes, I am really very, very old. And I qualified in 1986. I took exams to become a general surgeon, but then I resigned 10 years later to retrain as a field linguist. My husband and I actually worked in China among an ethnic minority group for some years before returning to Cambridge. I then took more exams, that was the really worst bit, to become an interpreter and a translator. I then worked for several years in that profession before finally ending up as the clinical anatomist at Cambridge and a fellow at Magdalen, where I'm still now. So I became that in 2009, so I've been here for a little while as well. Because our time is limited this evening, I will actually just share a couple of significant events in my life that kind of relate to the talk, and to say how knowing Jesus makes all the difference, and now how living a life in obedience to him is truly exciting. It may mean I had to make some very tough decisions, but following our good shepherd is definitely the best way to live. And trust me, as one of his sheep, I have strayed enough from the path too many times to mention, and it's only Jesus' love that's brought me back to him. So knowing him gives us true freedom from the pursuit of fame and success and ambition. So the first step, just the first story, is just becoming one of his sheep. You know, I have to become a Christian first. As I said, I was born in Hong Kong, and when I was 15, my father died very suddenly and unexpectedly. I mean, he literally dropped down dead one day during the Chinese New Year festival. I was very, very close to him, and so it was a devastating effect. He was only 50 and never had any major health problems. So his death led me to question why I was human, why I was on this earth, what I had to live for, the sort of questions that you ask yourself, who am I? And it took me at least a year because I did science, so I was very, I wouldn't just believe anything. So I investigated the claims of Jesus myself. I read through the whole of the Bible, investigated the evidence for his resurrection, reliability of the Bible, before I actually committed my life to him. One verse that was key to my turning to him was the one in Luke 19:10, where Jesus said, "The Son of Man has come to seek and save what was lost." And I realized I was lost, and he had come actively to find me. And as my creator, he commands my full allegiance. So that was the first step. Unfortunately, fast forward a few years, returning to my degree here, I qualified. I did junior doctor jobs in different parts of the UK. And when I worked as a house officer for a general surgeon, I came to love operating. My consultant was very, very kind and gave me a lot of chances to operate, to go to theatre. And in the words of my registrar, who was my immediate senior, I had caught the bug. Soon I became really addicted to the thrill of being in the operating theatre. I mean, every operation provided me with an adrenaline rush. And as I was a surgeon in the days of open surgery, nowadays everyone has keyhole surgery now with sort of little holes. But I enjoyed making very, very long and very large incisions in people. and I loved nothing more than scrabbling around in the abdomen. And having blood splattered on my face, on my glasses, and theatre shoes were basically, part of the excitement. Of course, I hasten to add, I wanted to help my patients. I did want to make them better, but the actual cutting was what I wanted. But as a Christian, Jesus Christ should be king of my life. He should be the one calling the shots and directing everything I do. And so when something or someone actually takes the place of him and becomes the reason for which I live, then he becomes an idol. And for me, surgery actually was my God. I quickly became really addicted to it. Of course, I didn't worship it openly. It wasn't obvious to people. I looked after patients. I was still treating them well. But my whole life was taken up with it. I was in theatre sort of day and night. Please don't get me wrong. Not all surgeons are mad like that. I'm sure that many surgeons have a good work-life balance, but I'm just telling you how it was for me. But I started to fall apart at the seams, emotionally and spiritually. There was nothing wrong on the outside. People might not see what was happening, but I was rotting inside. At one stage, I lived in Cambridge, and I I worked in Essex, so I went there at 5 in the morning on Monday and came back at 1 in 2 weekends. Began speeding down the M11. Some of you may know I don't even have a car now, but I used to drive a lot. I was seriously shaken up when I narrowly missed a very serious accident. I shouted at nurses, shouted at colleagues. I did many things I now deeply, deeply regret, but can no longer undo. I wish I could say sorry to all the people I had hurt. But finally, God brought me up short. And there's no time to tell you in detail what happened, the long story really, but it was very painful. At one point, I did actually think about putting an end to it all and throwing myself off high-rise building. But thankfully, God didn't allow that to happen. I resigned from the very excellent surgical rotation I was in, which was a massive, massive step. But I couldn't be a surgeon one day and not operate the next. It's like cold turkey, because that was me. And so God kindly provided me with a research job at Addenbrooke's, where I could assist in theatres and do some surgical locums, so sort of weaning myself off operating. It took me a few years to recover, but I was truly free by the end of it, free from that kind of the chains of that. Lastly, I'll tell you a third story. This is not about myself, but about a family that we knew who have been also liberated from their chains to other things. This was after I resigned from my surgical job. As I said, I retrained as a linguist, and we worked in China for a little while. I don't have time to talk to you about everything we did, but we saw God working in many, many miraculous ways in people who had heard the good news of Jesus. And this is just one example of Jesus changing lives and his transforming power. It's a family with a mother who was a biologist. She was a biologist in a university in China, and a father who was a businessman. They had a teenage son when we first got to know them. The mother became a Christian after I spent time studying the Bible with her, but her husband was a staunch atheist and delighted in provoking us during Bible studies. He would come, but he would just ask very awkward questions and was very, very difficult. He had a very bad temper. He was addicted to gambling, and his wife had actually obtained a legal divorce so that he wouldn't bankrupt the family, because she didn't want him to use up all the money so that she could still get her son through university and through school and university. So they were legally divorced so that financially he can't take the money, but they still lived as a family. So after I returned to the UK, I would return with one of my children every year to visit and encourage the Christians we knew, and so they were one of the families that we would sometimes meet, because we had Christians all over China, and as you know, China is massive, and so we could only visit certain people each time. And one year we felt very strongly that God wanted us to go back to see them. And my son and I still remember extremely vividly the first night we arrived at their home after a 24-hour train journey from Beijing. And we discovered that the mother was in floods of tears because her husband has just taken her son out of the house in order to kill him. Because it's not so rare in China. I mean, I'm not suggesting, Chinese men kill their sons all the time, but this does happen. Over the past year, in the past years, her son had become so addicted to video gaming. I mean, you're probably familiar with that concept. I mean, I'm not really, but I know people do that kind of thing, that he was playing games for as long as 3 consecutive days and nights. He would have, food brought to him in internet cafe. He stole money from his family, from his parents. He's neglected his schoolwork so badly he dropped out of school. So her husband had already beaten him up several times. He didn't listen, but his son couldn't change. And so on that day, his father had decided that he would just go. It was a very remote place that we worked. I would drive off with him in a taxi and then drown him in the river. So they'd already gone by the time we actually arrived. We were surprised that my friend hadn't come to meet us at the train station. She usually would do, and I could understand why. So I remember my son, who was quite small, whispering very softly in my ear, "Now you know why God wanted you to come to this year." A very astute but not very helpful observation at that point. But there was only one thing we could do. We just all sat down on the floor and prayed. That was the only thing we could do. But while we were still praying, the husband and son came back. And the reason they came back, which was quite amazing, was that when the taxi driver heard them talking and realized what the dad was going to do, he decided that he would bring them back and he would not take them. This is quite unusual because most taxi drivers, who cares what you're doing? It's nothing to do with me, isn't it? But they came back. Obviously, it wasn't a happy family reunion. They just came back, didn't talk to each other. I was actually quite worried that the son was going to kill himself because he went to the kitchen and didn't come out for ages. I had to go and see him bind up his wounds. He had been beaten up quite badly. And I was really touched to hear my friend, who's the wife, praying in these circumstances. So no matter how much pain and suffering it would take for my son and my husband to come to know you, I'm content to submit to your will. I mean, she didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody knew what was going to happen to their family. And to cut a very, very long story short, because I could be here for hours, several years later, both father and son have repented. They've both come to know Jesus. And my friend has remarried him legally, and their son is also now happily married. When I last saw them a few years ago, so I've been seeing them fairly regularly, it was difficult to believe he was the same man. I have just both of them. And listening to him singing and praises to God, listening to him praying. And he was just so full of love and kindness to other people. It's unbelievable. And he couldn't stop himself from telling people about Jesus. And he's just freed from all the things that had kept him enslaved. So anyway, that's all I'm saying for now. But if you'd like to hear more stories, please do come to a talk. I'm giving you an advert for a talk I'm giving for Magdalen Medical Society next Wednesday, 15th of February, between 5 and 6 at Cripps Auditorium, Magdalen College. You're all very welcome. And I will say more and flesh out some of these stories, how knowing and obeying Jesus gives us true freedom, makes us truly human, and frees us from all these pursuit of ambition. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much, Cecilia. So what is your favorite daydream? Is it that house, those possessions? Is it that relationship? Or is it, what was it, rooting around inside someone's abdomen? I think that was it, wasn't it? What is your favorite daydream? And what do we do? How do we navigate this question when our desires seem to outstrip our capacities? That we can't do everything we'd want to do, but then also, perhaps like some of the story that Cecilia was telling there, our desire seems to grow too big for our capacities. And we find ourselves being caught up, like Sarah chasing after praise, like my patients chasing after pleasure. What do we do? This week, the big question that we want to ask with the Christian Union is, when it comes to being human and when it comes to facing the reality of being human in this world, does God get to have an opinion? Does he get to have a say in what it means for us to be human? And if he did, how would we know what his opinion is? In front of you, on your tables just next to you, you have some copies of John's Gospel, John's account of Jesus' life. This is probably literally the most famous book ever written in human history. And halfway through this account of Jesus' life, John takes us to an episode where Jesus speaks right into this question. It's around about chapter 10, which is about halfway through. We'll turn to it in a moment. But at this point, what you need to know is that Jesus' reputation, surprising though it may sound, is not all good. He has been increasingly provocative all the way through this account of Jesus' life, particularly to the religious elite of his day. He keeps on provoking them. And here, we are about to hear him at perhaps his most provocative. It's page number 32. So please do grab one of those copies of John and turn up to that for me. And I'm going to read from little number 10 on page 32. Jesus is speaking. He says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep." And you might hear me reading that and go, provocative? Really? I know it sounds a bit tame, to be honest. Even in a kind of an obscure religious sort of a way with kind of pastoral and agrarian imagery, it sort of even sounds kind of lovely in a sort of kind of early first century sort of a way. You have sheep and shepherds and all of that kind of stuff. It's all kind of nice, isn't it? How could this possibly be provocative? If anything, it's just obscure. Well, if you had been listening to Jesus as he spoke those words, that would have been far from obscure. Because in the economy of the day, sheep farming was a massive deal. And all around you, as you heard Jesus speaking those words, would have been fields with sheep farmers, shepherds, looking after their sheep. You would have known shepherds personally. And you would have also known that when it comes to looking after sheep in that area, there are a significant number of wild animals, wolves and other things, with a big interest in eating the sheep. And also potentially the shepherds looking after the sheep. You may have known shepherds for whom it was extremely dangerous. You may have known shepherds who lost their lives looking after their sheep. It's far from obscure, massive part of the local economy, but also, if you were one of Jesus' hearers, then you would have also been Jewish, which would have meant that since you were a child, you would have known writings that have been written over the previous couple of thousand years, all about God, which would have literally shaped your view of the world, your culture. A little bit, in some ways, a bit like the King James Version of the Bible shapes our language now. So these stories and ideas from these writings would have shaped everything you knew, all your values. And as you heard Jesus say those words, you'd have been thinking, have I heard something like that before? Yes, I have heard something like that before. Because one of the most vivid promises about God in those writings, which we now know as the Old Testament, was written by somebody called Ezekiel. And he said this, one of the most vivid promises about God. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he's with them, so I will look after my sheep. As I say, these sorts of images would have shaped your worldview. They would have shaped everything that you hoped for as far as the world was concerned. And here, the big, vivid picture is the hope that somehow, someday, God was going to care for his people, of whom you would have been one if you were one of Jesus' hearers, like a shepherd caring for sheep. That is a vivid image imprinted on your deepest psyche. And now you hear this preacher, an apparent miracle worker, stand up and say, I am the good shepherd. It wouldn't be any clearer if he had stood up and said, I am God himself. That is what Jesus is saying in the hearing of the people of the day. I am the good shepherd. I am God himself. I am the culmination of all the hopes that are shaping your entire worldview. That's me, he says. Which is why I say he is at his most provocative, and explains why that by the time you get to little number 31 over the next page, you see that people pick up stones in order to kill Jesus. Because making a claim like that is not insignificant. And in the end, it is going to cause Jesus to be killed because he keeps on saying things like that. And for us, the language might feel a bit weird and obscure and sheep and shepherds, and it's all kind of slightly odd because we buy our lamb from Tesco's. So it's just far away from us. But when you start thinking about it, actually, this is where it becomes quite provocative for us too. In 2023. Because if Jesus is making an explicit claim to be God, then what does that make people? What does that make me? If he says, I'm God, I'm a shepherd, then it makes me a sheep. And we hate that idea. Sheep, no way. No, I'm not a sheep. I'm not a follower. Sheep are stupid and they follow. I'm a leader, and I'm free, and I'm chasing after the things that I want to do, spending my money the way that I want to spend it, doing all the things that I love to do. I am free, thank you very much, not a follower. But that isn't what experience teaches us. Whether it's the experience of the patient that I described earlier, or the patients that I looked after in A&E, whether it's the experience of Sarah or the experience of Cecilia and some of the people that she was talking about, in the end, experience shows us that we all follow something in a world that never quite delivers. Think about it this way. Think about somebody who achieves their daydream. Their wildest dream, they finally get there. You can think about it in all sorts of different fields, but one of the particular places you sometimes see this is in the sports, kind of the realm of sport, right? Andy Murray wins Wimbledon, the first British man to win the male title at Wimbledon for, 80 years or something crazy. It's absolutely massive when he does it. And one of his close friends, who's also a journalist who writes for The Guardian, wrote up a report of watching his face as he won that title. And he saw the emotions cross over his face. And do you know what the main emotion he described seeing there was? Fear. Relief, joy, yes, but then terror. Because, of course, the question is, when you reach that pinnacle, what now? What next? If I've achieved my daydream, where do I go from here? I was talking about my very short rugby career earlier on. Another example of someone like this is the former English rugby player, Johnny Wilkinson. Johnny Wilkinson kicks 3 points in the last minute of the World Cup final in 2003 against Australia to win the Rugby World Cup for England. He has been practicing for that moment hour after hour after hour for years of his life. And in his early to mid-20s, he reaches the thing that he has been aiming for all his life. And the question is, what next? He was interviewed about 8 years later, just before another Rugby World Cup, and this is what he said. There was always this idea that there was a payoff coming, the idea that if we win the World Cup in 2003, life will be like this. But after 2003, I realized there was nothing there waiting for me. So I told myself that if we did it again in 2007, there would be, but we didn't. So I told myself it would be there if I won the World Club Championship in France, and it wasn't. Every time I thought I'd got what I was looking for, there was nothing there. Another writer in the Bible describes it as chasing after the wind. If you grab a fistful of wind, what do you come away with? Nothing. There was nothing there. And Jesus says the problem is that with our desires that we chase after like this, it's not only that they don't deliver, it's also that they don't even have our best interests at heart. The things we chase after, he says, become things that we follow, and very real danger that they then become thieves which steal our joy and our freedom. Just like Sarah's experience. And that is where Jesus makes his counterclaim. Little number 10, on that page 32, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. Jesus says, all of those other things, in the end, chase after them, they will devour you. They will destroy you, but not me. Which begs the question, how can we know? How can we know that Jesus will really deliver what he calls life to the full? In a world of power plays, isn't this just one more power play? How can we know that he, let alone people who subscribe to, say that they follow him, have our best interests at heart? How can we know? Well, did you hear the reason that Jesus gives? The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Later on, little number 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. The reason we can know that Jesus does deliver when he promises life to the full, unlike anything else we might follow, is because rather than devouring us, he is prepared to be devoured for us. That's why at the very center of Christianity is the story of the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus. That Jesus took on the consequence of all of our distorted desires that end up eating ourselves, took upon himself at the cross, dying a death which literally invented the word excruciating, and then proved that he can offer renewed life, as he puts it himself here, takes up his life again. Like I would just pick up a bag that I'd put down. What kind of a person says he can do that? A person worth listening to. As I say, we are really keen to give everybody opportunity to discuss these ideas, particularly when they're huge claims that are being made by Jesus, by John, as he describes Jesus' life. And so we're going to have another moment now to just have an opportunity to discuss some of what we've heard, some of what we talked about. Maybe something from what Cecilia described has struck you. Maybe something from what I've said has just really got you wound up and you want an opportunity to vent, that's absolutely fine. If the first thing you say when you turn to the person next to you is, well, that was total rubbish, what he's talking about is nuts, well, that's absolutely fine. I'm not going to be offended in any way. But we do think that these claims are worth engaging with. And so a couple more questions are going to come up on the screen in case you need prompts for discussion. Where does human experience or history demonstrate or challenge Jesus' notion that we are followers, that we are sheep, as he puts it? And how do you react to hearing this language, Jesus' comments about shepherd and sheep? We'll pause for a few minutes, give you a chance to discuss these questions or anything else. Again, you don't have to join into the discussion if you don't want to. Just listen to what's happening around you. And then after that, we're going to hear a couple of performances from members of the Christian Union.
Does this one work? Hey! I've never been on a stage as tall as this before. Hello, everyone. Sorry to interrupt your conversations. I'm Lawrence. I enjoy playing film soundtracks on the piano, which is what I'm going to do in a bit. And was thinking about human, and therefore, well, what music can I play? Okay, what soundtracks really make me feel so emotional that I end up crying? And I think two film composers are particularly good at this. One is John Williams. He wrote Star Wars, he wrote Indiana Jones, but he also wrote Schindler's List, and my goodness, that is powerful. Another one is Howard Shore, less well known, but he wrote the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. And if you've seen the third film, that moment when the riders of Rohan are coming over a hill and the sun is rising and the solo violin comes in, it is fantastic. So I'll be playing you some Lord of the Rings, some Star Wars tonight. Why did I pick those two? Seems I need to tie it back into ambition. Well, musically at Cambridge, sometimes I've had an ambition to just be as busy as possible. That hasn't been great, but this year, perhaps better. Another ambition, it's a bit strange talking about it tonight, and I'm not sure if I would have done, but I find it hard to convey exactly how much I would like people to know or just experience or feel things about what I know faith is and all this Jesus and churchy stuff. And sometimes I have like a Star Wars approach to it, as I call it. We go, we blow up the Death Star, let's go home. We bring our friends to an event, and then we go home. Which isn't ideal. In fact, it's pretty awful, to be honest. I would like a Lord of the Rings thing, a way that Sam cares for Frodo thing, a way that we are genuinely interested in you and how your day has been and in what you think and in the people you care about and in what you're doing tomorrow and the week after in the same way that Sam cares for Mr. Frodo. That was a very waffly way of introducing some Lord of the Rings and some Star Wars music, but this is Ray's theme and the Breaking of the Fellowship. I hope you enjoy.
Is this working? Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Ifunaya, and I'll be reading a Thank you. Yeah, this works better. So yes, the poem is called Human and is a little thing that I wrote for this week. I stand still before this blurred mirror. Crimson blood racing through my veins at the beat of this mortal heart. I am looking within, yet I cannot mark out the lines of my figure. Who am I? Awake to my thoughts, aware of my living, awfully conscious of my very being. I am looking within, yet I cannot mark out the lines of my figure. Who am I? I am in need of the truth this blurred mirror conceals. Where do I find the answer to what it means to be me, if not by looking within? Yet I cannot mark out the lines of my figure. Who am I? A lost sheep, seeking for a home. I am called to look up. A created being reflects the Creator. I look up. In fear and in wonder, I was made by the Father, and He is revealed by the Son. The cross, my liberation, the cross, my definition. In this cursed tree, I see a crystal clear image of me, the image of you, of all that we are. I am defined by this and liberated by it. Who am I? Fashioned with dust, with the care of such love, breathed into life amidst glorious light, earthly flesh and divine spirit, an embodied soul who was seeking for a home. Oh, this cross. I see love poured out from above, from my heavenly Father, Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. I see eternity. I see my home. Who am I? The Lord is my shepherd. I am who He says I am. I am who He says I am.
Amazing. Thank you both. So we are coming towards the end of our time together for this evening. This is only the second of 5 evenings, and we have another 3 lunchtimes as well to be able to continue thinking a little bit about this theme of what it is that makes us human, and some of the big questions that surround that. But as we come towards the end of this evening and thinking about this idea of limits and liberty and what happens about the fact that we have so many desires as humans and such limited capacity, and how so often we can find that our desires end up eating us up, what question out of John's account of his life does Jesus ask of us? And really, the question that he asks out of this part of John that we've been thinking about this evening is this: are you one of my sheep? Which might sound kind of weird, and you might be thinking, that doesn't make sense. Surely the question is, would you become one of my sheep? Surely this is an invitation. Like, would you stop following one shepherd and start following another? Surely this is what Jesus is saying here. But I don't know if that's quite right. Perhaps you maybe caught it earlier on as I read some of Jesus' words. Listen again on page 33 to what Jesus says, little number 14 if you're following along. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. See, the thing is, in the Middle East, even to this day, shepherds don't use sheepdogs to round up their sheep. That's not what we're to picture when we picture shepherds that Jesus is talking about. Shepherds in the Middle East use their voices. They call their sheep by name, and their sheep hear the voice of the shepherd and follow the shepherd. So sheep will gather together in one big communal pen, and the shepherd will stand at the gate of the pen and call their sheep by name, and their sheep will follow them, and they'll take them off to wherever it is the best grass is to be found. And that's the picture that Jesus paints here. You might think of it as when you think of a child that you know, or you can think of one of my children if you like, though you've not met them. The other day, I'm walking along the street, and one of my sons, who's 7, absent-mindedly kicks a stone, as boys want to do, and it accidentally hits a car that a guy just happens to be standing washing. Some of you have been there, the feeling. And my son takes one look and literally just starts running in the other direction. And the man stands there and goes, "Oi!" And of course, "Oi" is not going to stop him in his tracks. But I'm with him and I call his name. And on that occasion, he did stop. Because it was like what went through his head was, did I just hear my dad speaking? Was that my dad's voice? Yes, it was. It was my dad's voice, and I'm going to listen this time. And it could be that something like that is happening to you. It could be that it could even be happening tonight. That as you hear Jesus' words, as we look at Jesus' words in John, as we hear him speaking about all the things that we might follow, you find yourself being understood in a way that you weren't expecting. And it's almost as though, although you might be running off in one particular direction, you hear this voice and you think, did I just hear God's voice? And John would be the first to say, yes, you did. And he is calling us to turn our backs on anything else we might follow and follow him as our shepherd, as our good shepherd who lays down his life. So his question is, are you one of my sheep? And as you hear that question, many of you might be thinking, I don't know. No, I don't know. In which case I would say keep on looking. Pick up this copy of John that you're now holding. Take it away with you. Like I said last night, it's so thin, you're Cambridge students, you eat stuff like this for breakfast. Just read it through. See what you make of this guy, Jesus. It might be that for many of us, we're going, yes, I know I am one of Jesus' sheep, and I rejoice in that. Well, keep rejoicing and keep following. But it may be that some of us in the room have got that sense, did I just hear God's voice? Did I just hear God speaking? Then we would say, keep listening. Keep reading John. Keep chatting to your Christian friends. Come and talk to me. I'd be delighted to chat to you. And wherever you are, anywhere on that spectrum, from kind of no way to yes, and it's brilliant, and I've known this for a while, we want to give you an opportunity tonight just to respond to what we've heard. We've discussed it. We also want to respond to it. And what we're going to do is just stick up a QR code, which is a kind of the response form that the CU are using. It's not going to ask you for a whole bunch of details. It's going to come up on the screen. There it is. What I want you to do is to take out your phone and scan that. And I'd love everyone in the room to do it, because some people in the room may be wanting to actually respond by saying, yeah, maybe I did just hear God speaking, and that feels weird. And now I feel kind of slightly awkward about that. So if everyone pulls out their phone and scans it, it will take you to a very short form. You don't have to give any of your details if you don't want to, but you can if you want us to be in touch with you. And there's a free text box which gives you the opportunity to just to write one short sentence, maybe between 2 and 4 words. Maybe you could write something like, tell me more. I'd like to meet up to chat, and we can get in touch with you. Or I'm reading John. Maybe someone could read it with me. Or more donuts next time. Or this is all rubbish. Genuinely, I'd love to hear that response if that's what you're saying. Or perhaps invite me to church. I'd like to find out more that way. Or maybe for you tonight, you want to say, count me in. I want to find out more. Count me in. I'll give you a moment to do that, but we also have an opportunity for our final discussion time of the night. So hopefully you've scanned that and you've got it on your screen and you can fill that in. Hopefully I've given you long enough as I've gibbered on here anyway. We're going to flick on because we're going to have a final discussion moment, just a few minutes, just to kind of respond a little bit more to what you've been hearing. And as I say, if the main response that you want to make is, honestly, this is all rubbish, that's fine. Talk about that. Talk about why. But it might be that you have other things that you'd like to discuss. So if we could flick it on to the last question, guys, if it will come up. Or we have to go all the way through the slides. Brilliant. Here are 2 questions for us to think about just the last couple of minutes. What questions would you need to ask if you were to understand what it really means for someone to follow Jesus, to say, yeah, I'm one of his sheep? And maybe if you are feeling brave and the person next to you, a Christian that you know, is feeling brave, how about asking them to describe what happened when they thought they were hearing Jesus' voice and how that came to be? We'll give you a few more minutes and then Chris and Sarah will be up to wrap everything up. Thanks so much for listening.
Hi, everyone. We just want to say a massive thank you. Thank you so much for coming. And we hope you've learned just a bit more about our Good Shepherd and the true and everlasting freedom that he offers.
And the conversation doesn't have to end tonight. Human is continuing for the rest of this week. Today we've been thinking about the theme ambitious, and still to come on Wednesday, Thursday and Friday are the themes of emotional, hopeful and finite. Tomorrow all the events, the lunchtime and the evening events will be at Holy Trinity Church down the road, and the international events, the international dinner even, will be at the Henry Martin Hall just beside Holy Trinity. Have a look at a flyer or ask a friend if you want more details.
And please feel free to stay and chat. We've got more drinks and donuts, so go get those Krispy Kremes. And yeah, also stick around. I think Matt will be here after the talk. So if you have any questions, if you want to chat, I'm sure he'd be happy to. Or if you came with a friend, why don't you ask their story? What answer did they give in response to the question, who are we?
And there are a couple other ways you might like to respond to what you've heard this evening. One of those would be, you might like to look at the bookstore just at the back of the church, see if there's anything that, piques your interest or will help you dig into questions more.
And as mentioned, we have those QR codes for your response. We just really want to thank you for engaging with us, telling us your thoughts, and they all stay open. So you can go back to the link, add to them, let us know if you want to take this further. Maybe you want to read the Gospel of John with someone in the CU and, dig into this question of Jesus and truth. We'd love to do that with you. And the CU is also hosting a series of events for the next 4 Mondays called The Search, which will be answering those questions that have come up this evening. So there will be a video advertising that after this, but this is just a big thank you to you all, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
If you enjoyed thinking about what it means to be human and thinking about who are we, I would love to invite you to keep exploring. And the way we're going to do this is for the next 4 weeks on Monday evenings, we are going to be coming together for The Search, What is the search? It's going to be 10 minutes of a talk and then loads of discussion. So bring your questions that you couldn't get answered, bring your disagreements, your agreements, and we'll have a great chat and explore these things together. Let's head over there. So here we are, we're at the John's Divinity School, and this is where the search is going to be. There's going to be someone to let you in, warm welcome, some food, a 10-minute talk, and then loads of chat. We're going to be looking at who is Jesus, what's wrong with the world, why did he have to die, and did he really rise again? And I would love to see you there. So 7:30 on Monday, see you there.